Yes, welcome in. A couple days out from Wisconsin and Northwestern down at the very cozy. What do they call it? I don't even know what it's called down there. What's the name of the
Makeshift
stadium?
makeshift stadium. Can we just
No,
call it
it's
that?
we. I'm. That's what I'm going to call it. I think it's. They have everything is named after somebody down there. Obviously, and I know that's the case at most places, but only about 11,000, 12,000 people can fit in there, and I'm sure it'll be packed as Wisconsin goes for win number 3, and Northwestern looking to build on their win over Maryland. We'll get into the game coming up here in a little bit. We also talk about AJ Blazek and the offensive line because Jesse had a chance to talk with AJ for the first time since fall camp, I believe, correct?
That is right.
All right, so we'll get into that. We've also got our Week 8 picks, and things are getting closer, Jesse, getting closer. It was a good week for Zach. So we'll get into that coming up in a little bit. But first, obviously, Home Field Apparel, the apparel sponsor of the camp and the best vintage gear you could possibly find anywhere. If you go up to homefieldapparel.com, you're going to find a whole bunch of new Wisconsin gear. They got the jackets, they got the hats, they got the sweatshirts, they got the t-shirts, they got everything, and they're extremely, extremely comfortable. So go check them out, homefieldapparel.com. Use the promo code Bucky24 for 15% off your first purchase. And another reminder that's coming up after the game on Saturday, myself and Ben Kenny will be on our camp YouTube page to break down everything, instant reaction from Wisconsin's game against Northwestern. And then Jesse will be back with me on Sunday to talk about what he saw down there in Evanston. So, all right, let's jump into this. It is Northwestern week, and Wisconsin and Northwestern have split their last 10 meetings. And it has been a situation where Wisconsin has been favored in, I believe, all of those games, and sometimes double-digit favorites in those games. Go back to last year, obviously, very, very embarrassing. Not my words, Luke Fickell's words after the game when they lost 24-10. Just didn't show up. They were down. It felt like they were down double digits almost from the jump. It felt like they're in the first half at Camp Randall. It feels like they have something to prove against Northwestern. Would you agree with that?
Very much so. Anybody who was associated with this program a year ago understands what that felt like. And Luke was clearly seething after that game. And as you mentioned earlier this week, still distraught about that performance a year later, understandably so, because that is not the standard of Wisconsin football or why he came to the Badgers. Wisconsin was down 3 touchdowns at halftime and got booed off the field. It was the worst performance that we saw all season, somehow even worse than the one they had a week earlier against Indiana. So a lot has transpired in the last year. But this is a big one for the Badgers for a number of reasons. You want to show that you can put a better product on the field against Northwestern. But Wisconsin can get to 3 straight wins, 5-2 overall, and 3-1 in the Big Ten. This is a big moment for them. And it's certainly not going to be easy because Northwestern just always seems to make this a slog. And I expect it to be something similar this time around.
So it is called the Lanny and Sharon Martin Stadium. So
how could you forget?
I don't know how that's possible. So yeah, that's a fun name. They have had some issues down in Evanston over the years. Some weird things have happened down there, and again, this is blow that stadium up, which they did. Obviously, was Ryan Field? Used to be Dice Ryan Field, but Ryan Field they blew it up. They're building a new one down there, but you would hope with it goes all the, if you're Wisconsin, all the bad juju that was associated with it. I'm not going to make too much of it, but 1992, which you obviously know because you wrote about it when you're doing the whole narrative about, not narrative, but the whole, what's it called?
An oral history about Barry Alvarez's turnaround. This is the Jason Burns game.
Yeah, 1992, Wisconsin sitting there at 5-5, an opportunity to get to 6-5 in a bowl game for the first time in I think like 8 years, and he fumbles late in that game, and they end up losing. 2009, John Clay goes down there. They're driving for a potentially game-winning field goal. He fumbles. Remember Melvin Gordon in 2014? Dude ran for like 250 yards, and they lost because Tanner McAvoy / Joel Stave threw like 8 picks. Some bad home losses too. 1996, Ron Dane fumbles late in that game. Potentially could have just taken a knee. Barry will never say that they could have done that, but it's possible. And then the 2000 shoebox, they had almost gotten through all the shoebox suspensions. They'd gone 3-0. Hadn't been pretty, but they'd almost gotten through it. They lose in double overtime in that one. And then Jazz Peavy. Still a catch. They scored 3 touchdowns that day. They got taken off the board. I don't care about the first 2, but the third one was definitely a touchdown. So this has been, when we talk about teams that Wisconsin has routinely beat throughout the years during this 30-year stretch, it really, obviously it's a little bit different these last 10 years, but they have 2 wins in Evanston since 1998, I think, or 1999. It's not good. The history down there is not good. The history against Northwestern is not good. We can talk about how often they beat Minnesota and beat Purdue and beat those teams, but it has not been the case with Northwestern.
Yeah, obviously it's a different team. David Braun has now taken over for Pat Fitzgerald, but I think he to me is one of the more underrated coaching jobs given what he had to do a year ago. And I wrote about him in the offseason. I think it was a lot of other teams are being paid attention to, but they end up obviously beating Wisconsin, going to a bowl game, and David Braun wins as many games as a Northwestern rookie coach has won. And now they're 3-3. It hasn't been pretty. I feel like you could say that every year about the Wildcats, but they're coming off a win on the road against Maryland and gotten better quarterback play. I just think this is going to be one of those, to me, and it's what does success look like? We talk about every Thursday before the game. What you've done as a program, I'm talking about Wisconsin, the last 2 games, is absolutely what you're going to need to do in this one. I don't know how many of those open up the field, hit some 50-yard touchdown passes are going to be available. You would think maybe a couple, but stout run game, physical defense, that's consistently what it takes to beat Northwestern. And I also just wonder about the environment. I mean, playing right on the lake, what's the wind going to look like in an October game? How much will that matter?
Yeah, it looks like the weather's going to be actually okay, but you just never know with coming off the lake, the wind. You just never, until you get there on the day of, you just don't know. Couple of things. Northwestern's rushing defense, quite good. Ranked currently 9th in the country. Teams averaging less than 3 yards a carry. Can Wisconsin move the ball on the ground? I think is obviously a huge part of this. We know what they've done these last 2 weeks, and they've run the ball somewhat successfully against almost everybody this year, but this is going to be a test, especially after what happened last year at home where they got pushed around on the offensive and defensive lines, but offensive line just didn't do a good enough job. And the other thing you mentioned there was the explosive plays. Wisconsin has 13 plays of 30 or more yards the last couple of weeks. They have a total of 25 of the season. So they played 6 games, and more than half of their big plays have come in the last 2 weeks. Northwestern does not give up big plays. They just don't give up explosive plays. Just 4 plays of 30 or more yards. Wisconsin had 5 in the game against Rutgers last week. So can they take advantage, or can they have any success in getting some of those big plays that have so much helped this offense these last 2 weeks? It's been the run game. It's been the explosive pass plays and run plays for that matter. But can they do that?
Well, I would say they're not going to stop taking shots, and that's the good thing. Like, obviously,
you would hope not.
Yes, under previous regimes, you obviously knew what you were going to get, and you were probably going to run the ball 40 plus times. And I've said before, while they still want to rely on the run game and the offensive line, they are going to try to take some of those. So I don't know how many of those will be available and how many they'll hit, but absolutely, this is another one of those games that you put on the offensive line. You have to hope Tawee Walker, who's had 2 really good games, 6 touchdowns on the ground the last 2 games, can get something going, because that to me is where it starts and how Wisconsin is going to win this game.
So I talked about the run defense for Northwestern, talked about the lack of explosive plays. They are not great against the pass. They are ranked 17th in the Big Ten against the pass, 114th in the country against the pass. Every team that they've played so far has thrown it at least 31 times. Do you think, and they've racked up some sacks, they got 15 sacks, but when you're passing at least 31 times a game, you're getting a lot of opportunities to rush the quarterback. Do we think they can protect Brainlock? And if so, can he take advantage of that?
I think they've shown the last couple of weeks they have an ability to protect Braden Locke. He's been sacked one time, and has had all the time in the world on a lot of these throws. So that would be my expectation. And the other question, can they take advantage? Well, they've got the playmakers that have now shown they have the ability. So I do think there's going to be a couple of those where they can do it. And if it's Vinny Anthony taking the top off the coverage, if it's Tretch Kekahuna, just get him the ball in space. Don't know what the status is going to be of Bryson Green. Obviously, didn't play a week ago, got hurt the week before, and Will Pauling has been injured in the last 2 weeks. So that will probably dictate some of the success in the passing game. But I do think they're going to have an ability to hit a couple of those big plays. And again, they're going to need that complementary football to give themselves a chance.
Yeah, Bryson Green. So they do that mic'd up episode every Wednesday where they have a different guy, and Bryson Green, you could see was in there, and he was talking to Preston Zachman, who was the guy that had the mic on him, and he had a pretty extensive brace on his left leg. So we'll see. He was questionable last week. He ended up obviously not playing. We'll see if he's good to go. I know some people are like, oh no, don't that will hurt other things in this offense, but Vinny Anthony and him have played together a ton this year. So it's not like they're going to not be able to take deep shots because Bryson Green is back. Bryson Green and CJ Williams have usually play the same spot in this offense. So if anything, it would take away snaps from him, who's been, as I said earlier, he's been a great third down weapon the last 2 weeks. All 5 of his catches I shouldn't say third down weapon, just in general, first down weapon, 5 catches, 5 first downs. My one concern here is Braden Locke turning the ball over. I shouldn't say that's my one concern. It's a concern. At least one turnover in 5 of the 8 games that he's played extensive time. And in all 3 games that he started this year, he's turned the ball over. Not always his fault, but some have been. Northwestern had 4 turnovers forced against Maryland last week. It's the reason they won 37-10. They took advantage of it. Braden has to take care of the ball. And I know that's obvious, but it hasn't necessarily always gone that way for him. He's been great the last 2 weeks, but the can't make the decision he did, like throwing the ball, the triple coverage like he did last week. That's just a decision you can't make.
Yeah. Northwestern is the kind of team that they're just pesky and they hang around because they can do that and frustrate you. And so I don't know how many passes Braden's going to put up in this game. I still think it's going to be a lot. Will it be 31 plus? If I had to set the over under, I bet it's going to be pretty close. Because that's just what this offense is, even if it is more physical, but you can't put the ball in harm's way and obviously give your defense a short field. I don't know whether I trust Northwestern's offense to have to go 80 plus yards, because this could be one of those flip the field position type battles. So absolutely, those are the kind of mistakes that can kill you in matchups like this.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've talked about this before, like just in terms of the number of passes he's thrown in games where he's played extensive minutes or even or started, and he's been over 31. Except for Iowa, was over 31 every time last year. Only once this year has he thrown 31 passes. That was against Purdue. Otherwise, it's been less than 30. So I think taking that under might make sense here. Yeah, but I guess we'll see. I guess we'll see. Other side of the ball for Wisconsin and their defense going against the Northwestern offense that has not run the ball well. Didn't have Cam Porter for a couple of games, so I think that at least takes into account a little bit, but has not run the ball well and hasn't necessarily thrown the ball well either. But they have a couple of weapons in the passing game that could potentially give Wisconsin trouble. Bryce Kurtz, back-to-back 100-yard games, and AJ Henning, 3 catches for 70 yards and a 41-yard touchdown against Wisconsin last year. Those 2 guys stand out. They've thrown for 1,080 yards this year. Northwestern has. Those 2 have combined for nearly 750 of it. Yeah. Those are the 2. For me, that's the key on defense, dealing with those 2 guys.
Yeah, I also think this is one of those games where the defense can load up and try to make Northwestern one-dimensional, because I just don't know that that's where Northwestern wants to be. Cam Porter does have 5 rushing touchdowns this season, and I think we talked about this a week ago with a different situation, but with Rutgers, okay, Kyle Monungai's got 130 yards rushing a game. Take him away, make the quarterback beat you. and they couldn't do it. And I kind of feel like that's got to be a similar type of situation here, even though Northwestern does have a couple of playmakers. I just don't think that's the game the Wildcats want to get involved in. And I feel like Wisconsin's defense, much like the offense, is in a much better position to succeed here because of what they've been able to demonstrate here the last couple of weeks, where you've got multiple guys making plays. It's not a defense this year where, okay, guy's coming off the edge, he's a first team All-American, or he's an absolute first team consensus all Big Ten type of guy. That's not necessarily the kind of defense they have, at least in the front seven, but I think we've seen more and more playmakers, and that's got to be encouraging for Wisconsin.
It definitely does. Overall, I mean, just the stats for Northwestern are not great. I mean, they're ranked 128th in the country in total offense. That's 17th in the Big Ten. They don't really run it that well. They don't, again, as I said, don't really pass it that well. But they have guys that have been able to make plays, and maybe they have found something. Now, they, again, took advantage of 4 turnovers from Maryland last week, but maybe they found something with their offense last week. This is a tough one. This is just because you see the stats, you're like, this defense should feast. This defense, based on what we've seen the last 2 weeks, should dominate this game. And yet, little pesky Northwestern, the history of Northwestern Wisconsin kind of gives you a little pause. One note, though, they do not have their regular kicker. He is down with an injury. So now their punter is both kicking and punting for them. Luke Akers. He's 3 for 3 on field goals. He's the son of former NFL kicker David Akers. So he's doing both, which is we don't see that very often in college football. And obviously this situation is not ideal, but just notable. I think something to note there on the lake. We'll see. The one thing that really stood out to me these last 2 weeks for Wisconsin's defense, especially coming off what happened against USC and Alabama, is third down defense. I mean, against USC and Alabama, they allowed 19 of 31 third downs. It was bad. Last 2 games, 6 for 28. Northwestern, the worst in the Big Ten and one of the worst in the country at converting third downs. They're just at 29%. It's bad. It's bad. So Wisconsin, get off the field. Those how many 3-and-outs did they have last week? A ton, especially in the first half. Getting the ball back to your offense and getting them in good field position. And we'll see if they can duplicate what they did last week. But my other one concern is, can you catch a punt?
Yes, that has been an issue for both teams in every game, it seems like.
Not great. Not great at all. And those are type of plays that could change the momentum. We saw it at USC. We saw it for Wisconsin against Western Michigan. It's just such a huge, huge, huge play, because usually you're catching those balls in your own on your own side of the field, probably usually deep in your own territory, and it just sets an offense up so easily and so well that's very hard for a defense to overcome it. But we'll see. I think it's going to be a good game. We'll make our picks coming up here in a little bit. All right, so you had an opportunity to chat with AJ Blazek on Wednesday. He is the I would say the offensive line has been among the stories of the year for Wisconsin so far, especially when you look at what happened last year with the penalties and maybe not being as dominant as they wanted to be. This year, they have quickly rounded into shape, I would say. I think they've been the most impressive unit overall for 6 games, and a lot of people giving credit to AJ Blazek for that, along with Casey Robach and certainly the players, a veteran group. But what stood out for you in your conversation with AJ Blazek?
A few different things. And I went into this, I told him, the premise of this is, I don't think most people understand offensive line play. And even though I cover the team, I'm going to be real. I don't understand offensive line play. I never played it. And so he loved that, because he just wants to talk ball and talk about offensive line play. And I felt like his explanation to me about what it is like to play offensive line was indicative of the way he's able to relay concepts that may seem complex in a simple way. I remember saying that about Jim Leonard as a defensive coordinator. And obviously it's a different situation, but he was talking about
it too.
Yes. A lot of guys have that ability, but he was talking about how he compared the offensive line play to basketball and said, like, what's the most physical play in basketball? It's a screen. And on the offensive line, it's 5 guys trying to set a screen to create an avenue for the guy with the ball. And that's all obvious. But then he said something about, like, you could have the biggest door in the world, and all you need is a tiny doorstop under it. Why? Because that doorstop has leverage. Just like things I wouldn't have necessarily thought about, but I thought, oh yeah, that kind of makes sense, even though those aren't the concepts he's actually explaining to his own offensive line. But what I would say about this is there's not one great fix. Like that was kind of what I wanted to know. Oh, well, what was happening last year that is so markedly different? Oh, you're doing this blocking scheme and that's the change. I think it's more about the really small details. And yes, the players deserve a lot of credit. They're all veterans who've played a lot of games, but the way he's able to help them all in different ways, the physicality, the attention to detail. I also talked to Jack Nelson yesterday, and we know that he had issues with penalties, especially with false starts off the edge. And he was talking about how he was really struggling with that and talking to AJ this offseason as they were going over film because he wanted to get that quick first step in so he could try and stop somebody off the edge. And he was so in his head. And AJ just really simplified it and said, like, just because you think going quicker will help you before the snap or at the snap will help you in that situation, you actually need to slow down and focus on your steps. And there are a lot of other areas that AJ has helped him in, including posture and his ability to be a better pass blocker. But I just think AJ deserves a lot of credit for what he's been able to do with the group, the physicality that they've instilled. We've seen some of those inside run drills in camp. Like that is kind of the backbone of what they're all about. He said they run that on Tuesdays now during the week 8 times. They do 8 plays. He says it's the most physical football they will play all week. And by ingraining those habits in this team, it's allowed the offensive line to feel more comfortable when they get to game week.
It is a group that, again, continues to improve. But I think the Jack Nelson thing makes sense. And he kind of talked about it a little bit at Big Ten Media Days where it was just, he gives them confidence. He gives them, I'm talking about AJ Blazek, gives them confidence in knowing what they're doing and what they are being asked to do. And technique, actually teaching it the way that they that makes sense to them. It feels like it went from a very, and I know maybe this is a little bit over the top because I don't think Jack McNeil was a bad guy, but it felt like it was a little bit toxic in that there was a little bit of a toxic environment in that room just because they did not like the way that he was coaching them. And it feels like that has flipped 180.
Yeah, it's hard to speak on how they felt about a year ago because you're not going to have them openly discuss it to us. But obviously, Luke Fickell made a change and brought in AJ Blazek. And the way they speak about him with such reverence, I think, tells you how grateful they are to have that style of coach. And from a schematic or technical standpoint, one thing Jake Renfro talked about this week was he feels like they're much more aggressive off the snap. Like they have their landmark or their aiming point, and essentially it's the Marshawn Lynch philosophy of run through a dude's face, and it's not dude. Where as opposed to how he described it, there was a lot more maybe position blocking or reacting to what was happening. And it just feels like they've gotten back to more of the physical style that Wisconsin has been all about for so long. And when I was asking AJ about it, he said he also is very colorful in his descriptors because it will help the players remember. He doesn't talk about like aim for the guy's right shoulder. He's like, go through him and like break his arm. Or, I mean, obviously, they're not going to break somebody's arm, but like the way he describes it, I think helps them. And I also think just, again, it goes back to the repetitive nature of what they're doing with such fine details. Because another thing that he said that kind of struck me as important is if you put a plan in, you obviously want to put it in so they can be successful. And then you get to the next game week and 80% of the plan is the same. Then these guys are going to look at what they have to do and be like, sweet, I can do this with my eyes closed. And so I think that there's something to be said for that in terms of teaching it over and over with such fine detail that you get to a point that these guys are extremely confident. And I think that that's part of the reason, too, why we're seeing some success. He's also willing to coach everybody differently. We know how Jack Nelson and Joe Brunner operate. They run hot, but he's willing to get in their ass because that's what they need. And not everybody is exactly the same. And so I think that's another thing, too, is his ability to relate to the players. And some of this may sound cliche, and you could say it about a lot of different coaches, but when you're the offensive line coach at Wisconsin and you're the 4th one in 4 years, you better figure something out to get this group to play well, because that's why the offense is going to function.
Would you mind if I took that clip that you just said get in their ass? Is that a can I use that clip to promo this episode?
I think it's got to be more than that one sentence. Otherwise, it'll feel
Okay.
like taken out of context.
All right. I guess. Do you obviously AJ Blazek is new to that room, and I know Casey Robick was around, but do you have a feel as to what his impact has been?
It's hard to say because we obviously haven't seen practice for a couple of months, but we did have a chance to talk to both of them this preseason. I think it's been pretty substantial. And AJ, when he was talking to us back in August at UW Platteville, talked about embracing that and having two heads obviously being better than one there because of their vast knowledge and Casey's understanding not only of this program, but how to play at a high level and be in the NFL. I think they just kind of embraced it, and maybe they trade off in the responsibilities. But certainly you can't overstate the importance of having a guy like Casey in there, because it's essentially, I mean, it's two full-time coaches with that level of acumen on the offensive line. We constantly saw him pulling somebody aside, talking to somebody, giving them a pointer. Now, I don't know how the responsibilities are divvied up, but I do think that's got to contribute to some of the success here.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's also worth noting, and maybe we noted it when he was named the assistant offensive line coach. He was on the field a bunch last year. I know that wasn't necessarily legal to have guys like that on the field coaching, but he was out there, and I think he was keeping an eye on things. So I think he kind of knew and had a feel for what that room was. And he's also the one that is helping, obviously, recruit big guys, right? Like that's part of what his job was. So he has a lot of familiarity with a lot of these guys, not just the Jack Nelsons and the Riley Mahlmans, but also the younger ones, because he played a significant role in getting them to Madison to begin with. So he's kind of got that connection, which I think probably helps in that room. But this offensive line, if Wisconsin's going to have a shot in some of these games coming up, is going to have to play such a huge role. And I know that's obvious, but if they can play and control the line of scrimmage, even against the best teams that they face, Wisconsin has a chance to be in those games, assuming they don't hurt themselves like they did in their two big games so far this year against USC and Alabama. But their best teams have their best offensive lines. And if this group can put it together, you potentially have some opportunities for something special next weekend and later in the weekend or later in the year against Oregon when they come too. And I know the games at Iowa and Nebraska are just as important, but yesterday was the 14th anniversary of the last time Wisconsin beat Ohio State when they were the number one team in the country. And I put a video out there, and there were a bunch of people were like, gosh, why has it been so long since we've had a win like that to celebrate? And I'm like, well, you know what? There's a couple of opportunities coming up for them to potentially have something special to remember.
Yeah.
So we'll see. All right, time for our weekly picks. As I mentioned at the top of the show, things getting a little tighter. I had a 5-2 week. Jesse had a 3-4 week. So now I'm trailing by just 2 games as we head into week 8. And it is another solid slate, especially, got a couple of ranked matchups, or 3 ranked matchups, including Georgia and Texas. We'll get to that, but we'll start. And the reason I threw this game in here, because it's such a big number. And because of what happened last week, it's like Oregon and how bad Purdue has been. Oregon's a 27.5 point favorite as the number 2 team in the country, going on the road to West Lafayette, a Friday night game. Could they be in trouble for a little bit of an upset there, Jesse?
Not in trouble for an upset, but I'm going to pick Purdue because that number is just massive, even though Purdue obviously got annihilated by Wisconsin and lost 66-7 to Notre Dame. Maybe they found something by only losing by a point in overtime to Illinois, and Oregon's coming off a physical game, one of those games that everyone on that roster looked at before the season and said, this is the game of the year. So maybe there's an opportunity for a letdown. Like, I have no, false assumptions that Oregon's going to go in there and lose. That would be the upset of the year in college football. But although Vanderbilt, Alabama probably might have something to say about that. But I think that Purdue's going to at least cover.
27.5 is a huge number. I'm going to go with Purdue as well. Nebraska going on the road to unbeaten Indiana. The 16th ranked Hoosiers are 6.5 point favorites in Bloomington. A huge opportunity here for both teams. Like Indiana has not necessarily beaten anybody that you could, you're not going to go and talk about how great they are, but Nebraska is a good team. This would be Indiana's best win by far if they can get it done. And if Nebraska goes on the road and upsets the number 16 team in the country, all of a sudden you're looking at them a little bit different because their lone loss right now is to Illinois, who's ranked.
Indiana's getting a lot of love right now, understandably so, for the hot start they've had. But I think Nebraska goes in there and at least covers. I don't know if they're going to win, but I like having 6.5 points to play with.
Nebraska's defense is legit against the teams that we've seen so far. They have done a great. I mean, that they are back to the black shirts that they always wanted to be, but have not been for so long. Going into Indiana, Kirk Snetti, all I do is win. I'm gonna go with Indiana here. I think this is an opportunity for them to prove that they are not the paper tiger that some think they are. I think other people are really on board with what they've done. I kind of in the middle of that, but I do think they beat Nebraska and they covered that 6.5. Michigan going on the road to number 22 Illinois. The Wolverines are ranked 24th. They're 3.5-point favorites against Brett Bielema and the Illini.
I'm going to go Illinois here at home, at least to cover. I know that game a week ago was ugly. Illinois did lead by a lot for quite a while until Purdue came back. But I don't know. I don't know how much I can trust Michigan, especially on the road.
Yeah, look, it's going to come down to whether Illinois can stop the run. If Illinois can stop the run, they're going to win the game. If they can't, and they've had times this year where they struggled to do so, they won't. I think Michigan's defense is good enough to deal with Illinois' offense, but I don't know if Illinois can hold up against the run because that's all essentially Michigan has right now is running the ball. They don't really have a passing attack whatsoever. So I'm going to go Illinois at home. And they're getting 3.5. So I'm going to take Illinois at home. Alabama going on the road at Tennessee. The Tide are 3-point favorites in a battle of 7 versus 11.
Both these teams are scuffling more than they were at the start of the year. I don't know what's going on with Alabama. Obviously lost to Vanderbilt and then a 27-25 win against, I think, South Carolina. And so I think going on the road, now I have questions about the Crimson Tide. And so I think I'm going to pick Tennessee in this one.
I'm going with Tennessee as well, especially at home. Place is going to be rocking. A little Rocky Top down there in Knoxville. I'm going with Tennessee as well. Iowa, 4.5-point favorites on the road at Michigan State.
Tough one here. I was playing some pretty good football. And obviously their offense is better than a year ago, which is not saying much. I think I'm going to go with the Hawkeyes.
I look at their passing offense. Like we talk about that, right? They are, as I go and look it up real quick, 127th in the country in passing offense. Iowa is. But they have a very, very good running back and a very, very good rushing attack. And I think they go into East Lansing and beat and cover Michigan State. The biggest game of the week outside of Wisconsin Northwestern is Georgia going on the road at number 1 Texas. The Bulldogs the number 5 team in the country. Texas favored by 5.
I'm going to go Texas in this one. It's going to be absolutely lit in Austin, and the Longhorns are playing great football. What's so fascinating about all this is, let's say Georgia loses. Now you've got losses to Alabama and Texas. You're no worse than 10th in the country. You're still going to the playoff, but that's what it's like in the SEC. So I think Texas is going to win and show why they're the number 1 team in the country.
Yeah, I mean, Georgia would have 2 losses. They would obviously have to win out, you would think. Or could they get in with another loss? Like say they somehow were to get to the SEC championship game, which they're not going to. But say they somehow got there and lost that game, and they have 3 losses. Are they still getting in, considering who their losses would be against?
Well, I think 3-loss teams are going to be getting into the 12-team field, and that's exactly the type of situation where you would get in. It's just hard to speculate, not knowing how many losses the other teams would have, and obviously whatever number 12 will be a non-Power 5 program, so that takes a spot. But you're definitely not out of it with 2 and even 3 losses. But man, there's some good games on the slate.
So much talent at Texas. So much talent. Just watching that Oklahoma game last week, how fast and how quick some of those guys are. It's insane. It's like a video game sometimes with some of the talent that they have. I'm going to go with Texas as well at home. Wisconsin traveling to Northwestern. Badgers are 7-point favorites in this game.
7 points is a lot on the road against Northwestern for all the reasons you've laid out and over the years, which obviously has no bearing on this particular game. But I think I'm going to pick Wisconsin to cover in this one. It just feels like the last couple of games they found something. I know Purdue's not a very good team, and Rutgers maybe we overinflated where they are. I guess we'll know in the second half of the regular season. But I feel like Wisconsin's going to win 3 games in a row, get to 5-2, and then have another massive game 6:30 next Saturday against an unbeaten Penn State team that should be no worse than number 3 in the country.
Everything in my body is telling me to take Northwestern, the points, because it just happens. That's just what happens in Evanston. But who knows what happens on that field, a new field, a different field. I know it doesn't matter at all. I realize that what has happened there previously doesn't matter. I get it. Nobody on this roster has been down there. And, well, I shouldn't say that. Almost nobody has been down there to actually play in a stadium that had any fans in it whatsoever. The 2020 game was a little off. But these guys don't know anything about Northwestern. Half this roster has no idea what Northwestern football is about. And they also know what happened last year. They do know that. And I think Wisconsin comes out a little bigger, a little fight, and wins this game and wins it comfortably. So I'm taking Wisconsin there as well. We'll see. Should be a fun one. Do you have a key? Do you have a single player that is going to decide this game?
Oh,
give me a couple.
Well, I'm going to say Tawee Walker just because he's going to get the ball 22 to 25 times. It just strikes me as that type of game, and that's an easy, obvious pick, but he's the first one that came to mind.
I'm looking at the defensive side of the ball. Since you went to offense, I go to the defensive side of the ball, and I look at the 2 corners on the outside, dealing and certainly in the slot as well, dealing with those 2 wide receivers. And if they shut those guys down, I don't envision Northwestern having a ton of success because I thought last week Wisconsin did a great job against the run. Now, again, it's another quarterback that is a little bit more mobile than Ethan Kaliakmanis, but I feel like Wisconsin maybe has turned the corner in terms of being able to slow the run down a little bit. Saw that last week, and we'll see if they can continue it on. I don't know, but the corners on the outside, Ricardo Hallman, Nazir Forkreen, and then obviously when they go to a different package, Xavier Lucas, and Nazir's played a little bit in the slot these last few games. I think those guys are talented. The wide receivers, I'm saying, for Northwestern, if they can slow them down, I think this Wisconsin will slow down Northwestern's offense and really, I don't want to say stomp it out, but I feel like they have an advantage in the passing game. Now, can they create pressure? We'll see. That has been the one thing that has been missing, I would say, in terms of sack-wise, much of this year. But we'll see how it plays out. Jesse, have a safe trip down to Chicago, and we'll talk back on Sunday about a win or a loss and get ready looking ahead to Penn State next week.
Thanks, Zach. Talk soon.
All right, there he is. Jesse Temple from The Athletic. You've been listening to The Camp.